All right, everybody. In today's lesson, we are going to solve equations by taking nth roots. So one thing you want to have out is a calculator because we are going to be rounding our answers. If they don't come out to be whole numbers, we're going to round them to the nearest hundredth. So we're going to be typing in fifth root, cube root, fourth root, those kind of numbers into our calculator. So make sure you have that out and ready to go. So the steps for solving the 5 examples that we're going to do today, okay, and the ones that you're going to practice later, are to first isolate the variable or expression with the exponent. Now these are going to look really similar to when we used to solve quadratics by taking square root. You would get the x to the second by itself. After that was by itself, step 2, you're going to take the nth root of each side. So like before, when you had x to the second and you got that by itself, you took the square root of each side to get the answer. Well, today it might not be x to the second that's left. Maybe it's x to the third. Okay, so if you got x to the third, you're going to take the cube root of each side. Or if you get x to the fourth by itself, you're going to take the fourth root of each side. So the nth roots undo the exponent of the x, and that's going to help us solve for x. After you've taken the nth root of each side, you might need to keep solving if necessary. So I do have an example, number 5 here, where we will need to move on to step 3. A couple of things you don't want to forget though, like when you do step 2, when you take the nth root of each side, you need to remember a couple of things. All right, the first thing you need to remember is that if you take an even root of a positive number, you need to include that plus or minus symbol with your answers. We used to do that when we solved quadratics. Like when you took the square root of each side, remember I would always say, don't forget plus minus, don't forget plus minus. Well, this counts anytime you take an even root. So it could be square root, cube root, or sorry, square root, fourth root, sixth root. You have to include plus or minus with those answers. You also need to remember that if you take an even root of a negative number, that's not possible, and we're going to write no real solution. Okay, so you might get an error message in your calculator and you have to think to yourself, well, I'm taking an even root of a negative and that's not possible. Right? If you are taking an odd root of a positive number, that's fine. You will get a positive number. If you take an odd root of a negative number, this last one right here, taking an odd root of a negative number is fine. You just have to remember your answer is going to be negative. Okay, so don't forget these rules about taking roots of positive and negative numbers. All right, so let's look at number 1. Okay, if I wanted to solve 4x to the 5th plus 5 equals 133, the first thing I'm going to do to isolate x to the 5th is I'm going to subtract 5. And I'll get 4x to the 5th equals 128. Okay. I don't want to take the 5th root of each side yet. I want to divide each side by 4, and I get x to the 5th is equaling 32. Okay. Now, x to the 5th is isolated. So what I want to do is take the 5th root, since it was x to the 5th, the inverse of x to the 5th would be the 5th root of 32. Okay, well the 5th root of 32, it actually is a perfect 5th power, but if you don't remember it, that's okay. In your calculator, you want to type 5, go to the math key, down to option 5, so that inputs the 5th root of 32, and I get out 2. So my answer is x equals 2. Okay, and if you look, we took an odd root of a positive number, it came out to be a positive number. Odd roots of positive numbers are positive. Okay, and number 2, I want to isolate x to the 7th. So again, I want to start by undoing any addition or subtraction. So I'm going to subtract 8 first, and I get negative 2 x to the 7th equals 222. I don't want to take the 7th root of anything yet. I want to divide by negative 2 first, and I get x to the 7th equals negative 111. All right, so at this point, to solve for x, I need to undo x to the 7th power. So that means I want to take the 7th root of each side. So in my calculator, I want to type 7, go to the math key, down to option 5, and I'm taking the 7th root of negative 111, and I get out an answer of about negative 1.96 that we'll round it to. We want to round to about 2 decimal places today. All right. So I get x equals negative 1.96. Okay. And again, if you use our rules from up here, we were taking an odd root of a negative number, and you can see it came out as a negative number. So, right here, odd root of negative number comes out as a negative number. All right, let's look at number 3. I want to isolate x to the 4th. So I want to add 9 first. So I get 5x to the 4th is equal to 90. Don't do anything with x to the 4th yet. You want to divide by 5 first. Okay, so I'm going to divide by 5, and I get x to the 4th is equal to 18. Okay, so now at this point, to undo something to the 4th power, I would take the 4th root of each side. The 4th root of x to the 4th just gives me x. Okay, if I'm going to type in 4, math, go down to option 5. The 4th root of 18 is 2.0, we'll say 2.06. However, you have to remember here, okay, and this is something you have to remember. Your calculator's not going to do this for you. When you take an even root of a positive number, so up here, because I took an even root of each side, I took an even root of a positive number, I need to include plus or minus here, because technically positive 2.06 to the 4th power would give you around 18, and negative 2.06 to the 4th power would give you 18. So this is one where you need to remember yourself that you need to include plus or minus with your answers. Okay, let's look at number 4. 2/3 x to the 6th equals negative 512. So I want to get x to the 6th by itself. So you could divide each side by 2/3. All right, just be careful when you type that into your calculator, or we can remember that dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply each side by 3/2. Okay, so on the left, I'm going to get x to the 6th. Okay, if I take negative 512 and multiply it to 3/2, I get negative 768. All right, and now to undo something to the 6th power, I am going to take the 6th root of each side. Now let's say I take the 6th root, so if I type 6, math, I go down to option 5 and type in negative 768 and hit enter in my calculator, I get this message, non-real answer. There's an error here. Doesn't mean you typed it in wrong. It means, look, we're taking an even root, the 6th root of a negative number. So if I go back up to my rules here, taking the even root of a negative number, that's not possible. Nothing to the 6th power will ever give you a negative number. All right, so this problem has no real solution. Okay, so you might get something in your calculator that gives you an error message. So you think about, did you type in an even root of a negative number? And if you did, you want to make sure your answer is no real solution. All right, so let's look at the last one, number 5. So this is one where we are going to have to continue solving after we take our nth root. So this time, instead of isolating the variable that has the exponent, I have an expression that has the exponent. So I want to get x minus 5 by itself, because then I can take the 4th root of each side and just be left with x minus 5. Do not distribute negative 3 into that parenthesis. Do not add negative 3 to the other side. Negative 3 is connected by multiplication. So I want to divide each side by negative 3. So I'm left with x minus 5 to the 4th power equals a negative 243 divided by a negative 3 gives you a positive 81. Now, because this is isolated, don't distribute the 4 into the parentheses. Take the 4th root of each side. The 4th root of this expression, these guys, think of it kind of as like they cancel out, and you are left with x minus 5 equals, well, the 4th root of 81. It is a perfect 4th power, but if you don't remember, you just type it in your calculator. 4 math, go down to option 5 again, 81, it gives you 3. Now, here's something you have to be careful about. Just like the problem above, I took an even root of a positive number. So this side, I don't just get out 3, I get out 3 and negative 3. All right, so what I have is x minus 5 equals plus n minus 3. This really isn't solved for x yet. So this is where I'm going to use step 3 here, where I'm going to continue solving if necessary. So what I have are two different equations. We're saying that x minus 5 equals 3 and x minus 5 equals negative 3. So if I solve each of those, I'm going to get x equals 8 for one of my solutions. And if I add 5 here, I'm going to get x equals 2 for my other solution. All right, so this is an example of one where you don't just want to say plus or minus 8 or plus or minus 2. You have to set x minus 5 or whatever's in the expression equal to the positive number, set whatever's in that expression equal to the negative number, and solve. You will get two different numbers. They might be two positives, they might be two negatives. It might be a positive and a negative, but you do have to show this work to make sure you get down to those two correct answers.